Have you ever encountered a leader who claimed to speak for God, but when you have interactions with them, you've left feeling manipulated, silenced, dismissed, your feelings are invalidated. Sometimes they become angry and be very vindictive sometimes in the way that they respond to you because you don't agree with them. When this happens, you could be dealing with an emotionally immature leader. Sometimes they masquerade as prophets because sometimes they say God tell them things, and because they say God tells them, they want you to be fully in agreement with them and fully get behind everything that they do. We see a lot of those on YouTube now who are prophets and who are saying God says and who want you to just buy into everything that they say God has sent them. I've told them, we see the inconsistencies in the things that they do. We see the inconsistencies in the lives that they live, but they want us to believe that God has told them something and we should all just do what God has told them. But you might be dealing with this not just on YouTube. You might be dealing with an emotionally immature leader in your church. Now, if you are dealing with an emotionally immature leader, in this video, I'm going to explore with you the characteristics of emotionally immature leaders and who they sometimes misuse. No, emotionally immature leader all the time misuse spiritual authority and how immaturity impacts others. And it's causing sometimes people to lose their faith. It may have impacted your faith. I know it impacted mine when I am dealing with leaders that I know do not have the emotional maturity to say, I'm sorry, I'm wrong, I did something, and to sit in the discomfort of that wrong. It really is a difficult thing to allow yourself to be led by a leader like that. But I'm going to go some more into emotionally immature leader. What does it look like in leadership? Now, emotional immaturity is marked by an inability to regulate emotions. Now, children have inability to regulate their emotions. Adults have inability to regulate their emotions. People who experience trauma sometimes have inability to regulate their emotions. So there's an inability to regulate their emotions, take responsibility for actions, or navigate relationships with empathy. An emotionally immature leader lacks empathy. Now they may talk it. They might talk empathy. They might say things, but they're very difficult in putting into actions the things that they say. Now, a leader who is emotionally mature is especially destructive. So you want to be aware of who they are. When you see it, how do you make decisions to boundary yourself, because it could be very destructive. They can leave a lot of destruction in their wake, right? So here are some signs that the leader that you're under might be emotionally immature, or that prophet that you're following on YouTube that are listening to. I see a lot of them now, and I call this throwing their dummies out the pram. When people are not listening to them, people are not buying into what they're saying, and they become very angry, very irate, very insulting, and they're getting prophetic words that are insulting. And we know that God is not like that, right? We know that God has sent prophets that have said hard things. We know if you read Jeremiah, he had some hard things to do. But one of the things that was very clear through Jeremiah's work is his kindness. Very kind, very compassionate. He was a godly man. He was not emotionally immature. So here are some marks of emotionally immature leadership. I'm going to talk about 4, right? So defensiveness. They react poorly to criticism. Constructive criticism, not constructive criticism. Emotionally immature leaders don't take criticism really well. They react poorly to it. And so sometimes they'll label that as disrespect. They will say you're disrespecting them. They will try to be dismissive. They will shut you down. They will not listen. They will project onto you and will bring up something that you did last year, even something that you've told them in private, in confidence. Their defensiveness will be so deep that they will project that back and use that against you if you try to give them any kind of feedback. They won't like it. And number 2, an emotionally immature leader lack accountability. They shift blame, like the projecting I just talked about. They shift blame and use spiritual language to justify mistakes. And this is where they'll say, oh, God told me. So God will tell them something today and something opposite tomorrow. And we know God is consistent. But an emotionally mature leader, because they lack accountability and want to shift blame, they will use spiritual language to justify their mistakes. Well, God told me to do it. There are people out here claiming that God has told them to do things that are sin, but they will say God told them to do it. And so be very careful about that. And there's a need for control. They need to control. They demand unquestioning authority. The emotionally immature leader will demand and question in authority. You will not question me. You must do exactly what I say. No questions asked. Just do it. And number 4, ego-driven. The prophecies that they give is about them. You know, I've been doing this work for 50 years, 30 years, 20 years. You are new. You just came. You're a boy. I started it before you were born. It's also very, demeaning language they will use when they're doing this, the ego-driven thing. So defensiveness, lack of accountability, need for control, ego-driven. So let's look at how emotionally immature leaders, some of them will use spiritual authority to control and manipulate. But let's see how emotionally immature leaders use prophecy to manipulate, prophesying to manipulate. They claim divine authority. So they will use phrases like, God has told me to shut down questions, to deflect, to try to get to have their way. And so if you are not as close to God as you think you are, if you do not read the Bible as you think you should, then this divine authority to shut down questions and to shut down any feedback that is negative can also get you to stop doing, because when somebody say God told me, how do you question that? Because we don't know whether or not God told them or not. But when we know the voice of God for ourselves, we will be able to spot that this is an emotionally immature leader. Emotional outbursts. Emotionally immature leaders will lash out, and this is what I call throwing their dummies out the pram. They will lash out when their authority is questioned. Sometimes they mask their anger with righteous indignation, but it's just anger, pure anger that is uncontrolled, rage that they're not able to manage, and it will be masked as righteous indignation. They will use fear as a tool. Do what I say because God told me this. They will instill fear by warning of God's judgment, what God is going to do, and, put people in a frenzy and a state of anxiousness and anxiety. Also, they create a narrative that is around them, me. God told me this. He told me that. I am being persecuted. I am being talked about. Everybody says this about me. You will hear them use language like that with a leader that is emotionally immature. Everything is about them. They center the narrative around them, even when it's about you and something that they have done to you, and you call them out on that thing that they have done to you. They will make it about themselves. See, everybody's about after me. They're controlling me. They're saying this about me and they're saying that about me. That's what they will do, right? So look at some of the impact, and you might recognize these impacts in your life. And if you have recognized the impact of an emotionally immature leader on you, then I want to encourage you to get support. So it gives us a spiritual confusion. Many people are left questioning whether God is real, whether they should disobey God or the leader. There's this confusion. There's this inconsistency with who God is and who the leader is. But because of sometimes years of being on the leadership that is emotionally immature and abusive, because an emotionally immature leader will be an abusive leader too, then there's this insecurity and confusion around what does God say and who he is. It's emotionally damaging. Being under such leadership will make you question yourself and your sanity and your own ways of seeing the world. It will leave you with feelings of guilt and inadequacy. And, this is spiritual trauma. And what we're noticing in practice as we work with people with trauma is that people who are coming now with spiritual trauma is similar to any other kind of trauma. So if you are recognizing that you're under an emotionally immature leader, I will really encourage you to pray about it and seek God's advice about what to do next and move out from under such leadership. They are skilled at creating division in the community. An emotionally immature leader will divide the church. They will divide the ministry. They will leave people distrusting others. They will use some as flying monkeys, and they will gaslight some, and they will leave the church or the organization in a state of chaos and division. And that's because of their own insecurities and their own inability to manage emotions. So how should you respond to an emotionally immature leader that is going to make sure that you are safe, that you are well and healthy and okay? And if you spot an emotionally immature leader in your church, how do you do it? My advice is not to go up against them one-to-one. And because sometimes they work a lot behind the scenes by manipulating other people behind the scenes. And so if you call a meeting, they will do a lot of politicizing behind the scenes. And so by the time you get to that meeting, they will have talked to everybody and everybody's on their side already. So it's really important to, number one, use discernment, lots of prayer and asking God for his guidance. When we know that the truth will triumph all the time, and you do not need to do politicizing to get people on your side. If you notice something, I would advise keep a record of interactions and conversations and things that they say. So the inconsistencies that you're going to name is not just things that you have said, but you have a documentation of the inconsistencies, especially if you are going to report them to higher people within the organization. Seek wise counsel. Wise counsel might be a therapist or someone who specializes in trauma, somebody who you have seen through years of consistent matching up words with actions, that they're able to give you direction in what to do and how to deal with them. Set clear boundaries, because the emotionally immature leader, while they will not like the fact that you're raising concerns and that you're saying things, they will still try to do things to either get you to, distractions that might be an attack on you, or try to do things to buy your favor, because they'll be doing it with other people around them. They might use other people to come to you. So while you're going to boundary yourself against the leader, you're also going to want to boundary yourself against the flying monkeys who might have been friends in the past, right? So you have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to protect your emotional health and your spiritual health. Don't feel obligated to accept everybody that comes to you to have a conversation about it or to talk to you. And don't feel obligated to listen to everybody who has a title, right, of wisdom. Because one of the things that leaders often use is that touch not the Lord's anointed. They often use that as a means of getting people to not question them, to not have anything, to say about them, and to not, for people to not give them feedback. I just want you also to remember that God is patient, he is kind, he is consistent, and he's loving and he's caring. And he's also looking at what these leaders are doing and seeing it, and he's not okay with it. And there's going to come a time when he will deal with it, So if you're raising these concerns, be very careful and mindful. Look after your own emotional health. It's really important that you look after yourself, because tackling this and trying to find ways of resolution can be very, very exhausting. Have you experienced this kind of leadership? Share your story in the comments and let us support one another as we are. And as I'm learning more about emotionally immature leaders, as I'm learning more about how we want the church to be healed, the things that are going on in Christian settings right now, that we want healing for the church. We strive to recognize, trauma and people that are in pain in our pews. And we want people to know, we want you to know that you can be healed, that God sees all the injustices, all the pain that you've gone through. He can see it. It's not okay with him. And there's going to come a time when the church will heal. Thank you for joining. Please like and subscribe to our channel, and share this video with somebody who is struggling with an emotionally immature leader and they're not sure what to do.